All right, in this segment, we're going to talk about sort of the big, put it all together of all those lines we've talked about. We've talked about harmony, we've talked about melody, but now we have to put them together in some sort of meaningful way. And there are basically three ways that we talk about doing that in art music. The first is very simple, and you will rarely hear it done in a concert. And that's because it is fairly simple. And that texture is called monophonic. Monophonic. Remember that mono means one, and phonic means sound. So it means one sound. Doesn't mean one instrument, one singer, or one anything else. It means one melody, all by itself, with nothing else going on. When we get into the medieval period, older music, we'll listen to a Gregorian chant, and that is monophonic. Everybody's singing exactly the same thing. Doesn't matter if there are 500 people singing it, it's still monophonic texture as long as everybody's singing the same melody, even if they're singing in different octaves. So if you are a bass and I'm a soprano and we're singing together but we're singing the same melody, it's still monophonic. There's nothing happening except melody. Now, as I said, you're not going to hear this much in concert because there's just not a lot of music written in monophonic texture that you would perform. You know, there might be exercises you would use for practice, but it's not something to get out on stage and go, hey, listen to this. So monophonic texture you might hear if you go to, say, a cello recital. They might do some Bach suites that are unaccompanied, so it's cello alone. It'll be mostly monophonic, but a cello can play more than one note at a time, so they can make their own harmony, and there it's not monophonic anymore. But I did find a lovely piece by Dmitri Kovalevsky, who's a modern Russian composer. And this is from a set of works for children, or young musicians, not necessarily children, where they're practicing different kinds of techniques. So we have here an entire little piece that's in monophonic texture. It's two hands, though. They're both playing exactly the same thing, assuming I don't miss any notes. So just listen. You'll see that it doesn't have much depth. You don't hear any contrasting sounds. Everything is the same, and that'll give you an idea about what a monophonic texture sounds like. So not only there do we have monophonic texture, you also get some nice examples of dynamic changes. So we have crescendos, decrescendos, a little bit of slowing down, mostly staccato with occasional legato for contrast. That's monophonic texture. Everything's doing the same, no harmony, nothing for contrast. So that is the simplest form, and as I said, you're not going to see it or hear it very often. Let's go to the other extreme now. This is the most complex of the forms, and it's called polyphonic texture. Sorry, not form, texture. Polyphonic, poly means many, and then phonic. So you think, well, gee, most music is polyphonic. It's got lots of sounds. That's what polyphonic means, right? But when we're talking about polyphonic texture, what we're really talking about is having many melodies. And you think, well, okay, lots of pieces have many melodies as they go along. Polyphonic texture, they have to happen simultaneously. So it's more than one melody playing on top of each other or on top of itself. Very simple example is a round. So if you sing row, row, row your boat, you know, we could sing it together, but I wouldn't hear you, so it wouldn't really work particularly well for me to tell what you're doing. But you know how the piece works. So we have one group that starts, another group that starts, and another group that starts. And as those parts keep adding, they're all singing the same melody. So we have one melody, but they're layered. So what we have is the same melody happening simultaneously, but starting at different times. And that's very typical of polyphonic textures, to have a melody, or we all have other names for it as well, but basically it's a melody that keeps starting and starting and starting and sort of rolls over and over itself. And it can get kind of complicated listening. If you think about trying to listen to row, row, row your boat and picking out any one line, it's hard to do because you just heard this thing go by gently down the stream. Up there it goes over there, and there it goes over there. So polyphonic texture can be sort of challenging to listen to because what are you supposed to listen to? Where am I supposed to be right now? So we're going to look at an invention by J.S. Bach, who is a Baroque era composer, and that's the period when polyphonic texture was really, really big. Lots of music from that period in that texture. So what we have here is our little theme, and I'm just going to play the beginning for you. So that's our general idea. We have a disjunct little melody that sort of outlines a chord, interspersed with little scale-like passages. So bump, 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 that's our little chord. Da, 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 is a scale. So that's how it starts. Then we have to add the same thing happening again. So here's the beginning. See, you came in the bottom. Basically the same thing. So far it's sort of like doing row, row, row your boat. But row, row, row your boat is really simple, and Bach's not going to do something really simple. I mean, he got paid money to do this. They weren't going to pay him to do row, row, row your boat. So once it gets started, then we will have these things, we call them episodes, where we just sort of go off somewhere else. But look, there's that little thing again. Our little chord jumping thing in a different key. And here it went to the left hand. And then we go to something else. And then we have a little place where we can breathe, because so far this is all really busy. And if you're listening to a piece of music and you think, holy cow, I can't find a place to breathe in there, it's probably polyphonic texture, because that's how it tends to play out. So we've come to a little bit of a close, but we jump right back in. So that's like we heard the first time, but we're in a different key now because that's what Bach likes to do. And then we have something different. Here comes that little chord thing again. And here it goes in the right hand. This part's hard, so I'll make the mess up for you. See, there he went through the whole thing we had. So he's just going through a series of chord changes with that same basic pattern, just going through a lot of different chords. And then he does it in the right hand. And then at the end, usually they have to tie it back together, because as it's such a flurry of things usually that you don't know how to get it all back together. But if you're listening to that, the thing you start paying attention to is, or something like that. Start listening for that little fragment that you say, okay, there's that thing coming in again. This only has two parts to it, so it's a fairly simple polyphonic texture. Bach was an organist, and so a lot of his organ music is 3 parts or even 4 parts, because he's got 2 hands plus 2 feet that he can do it in. So as you're listening, you start just catching it, and usually it'll go like soprano voice, alto voice, tenor voice, bass voice, and then maybe back up, and you can hear that it moves into different registers of the organ, so you can sort of find something to latch onto. But you start listening for the beginning of row, row, row your boat, if we were going to go with that simple example. And that's how you can follow polyphonic texture. You'll hear a lot of that in music from the Baroque era, and you hear it again a lot in the modern period. So there's a kind of a 200-year gap there where we don't hear much of it. Doesn't mean it's completely gone, but it's not the predominant texture. All right, so we've had monophonic texture, all melody. We've had polyphonic texture, which is a lot of melody bounding on top of itself. Most of the things you'll hear in everyday life and in many concerts is neither of those things. It's going to be what we call homophonic texture. Homo means the same and sound. You think, well, wasn't monophonic the same? Everybody was doing the same thing. Yes, just like to confuse you a little bit. So what we have here is basically melody and then something else. So it could be as simple as my Twinkle Twinkle. Melody, chords. That's very simple. We could make it a little fancier and break up the chords. So we could break up the chords, we could do fancier things, and obviously I'm not going to do that with Twinkle Twinkle, but there are lots of ways we could do that. So let's look at a really famous example by Beethoven. This is from his Moonlight Sonata, which is actually Sonata number something, Opus 27, number 2, in C sharp minor. So we have the familiar opening that everyone knows. So far, we haven't even had a melody. We just had this lovely series of chords with some nice bass notes in the bottom. Now we're adding the melody. So, very simple melody. If we just played, you would probably be gone to sleep. You might have gone to sleep anyway because it's such a lovely piece, even if I miss a few notes. But he sets us up with this nice little chordal structure. We know it's not melody. We know it's just chords. It's just a harmony. So when we add the melody to it, it's like, oh, isn't that nice how that comes together? So that's a really simple example of homophonic texture. You have a melody over something that's chordal. And you'll hear a lot of that in the classical period and even into the Romantic period. If you have a piece of music and you're trying to decide the texture, 90% of the time you can guess homophonic and you'll be correct. So always make that your go-to choice. Don't think it's going to be something more complicated than it is. Remember that you're hardly ever going to hear monophonic texture out in the real world. You know, if you sing in your shower, yeah, you got monophonic texture there unless you've got company or you got the radio on. Polyphonic texture, mostly Baroque music, so unless you're listening to that, you're probably not going to hear very much of it. Occasionally get a popular tune where you got a really creative composer who puts things together that way. But for the most part, you're going to have to take a guess, make it homophonic, and chances are you'll be right.